Tik hem aan.
Alright, there we go, jongen.
Dan gaan we dan.
Geweldig. Knap hoor. Beetje af.
Good morning, everybody. I'm supposing people are joining the room now, which I cannot see. So I'll just have to trust that people are joining us. We'll start in a little bit. I'm joined here by my esteemed colleague, Eric Vermetten.
Good morning.
Good morning. In a little while, we'll start a video, and after the video, we'll take you through the introduction of today.
Yeah, that's it.
So, goedemorgen and good morning again for those people joining late. We'll be starting in a few moments until everybody's made it into the room. There's always some people late, grabbing a late coffee or a late tea. I'm doing this in English despite the fact that most of the audience will be Dutch, but most of the day will be in English, so you'll have to get used to it.
Good choice.
And as soon as Floris is ready, we'll set up and start the video.
Just hang in there for just a few seconds. We are here at a historic place. This is the Endegeest Castle in Oegstgeest. It has been known for its reputation as a psychiatric hospital for many, many years, and now is a place where events are organized. And one of the events is that I can tell you a little bit about the special occasion that is happening this day, these coming days. And the ICPR is preceded by a special event, which is the International Symposium on Psychedelics in Psychotherapy and Psychiatry, the ISPPP, a special one-day event for the Dutch audience. Now let me tell you, we've been glued for the last 6 months or so on our screens with Zooms and Teams, and now again with Wova and with so many events that otherwise would have been alive, that we would have been able to connect and to meet each other. But unfortunately, that's not happening. Today, neither. So when I woke up this morning, as you woke up this morning, I opened the curtains, I brushed my teeth, and I thought, well, how can we connect? How can we inspire each other? And hopefully we can do that, even though we are disconnected in a live situation, but connected through these digital platforms that we're using. And I hope that I can inspire you, maybe by connecting you with this historical place and the wisdom perhaps and the history that is rooted in this foundation of a historical monument that's seen many things happen in the last couple of years. So I wish you a warm welcome and invite you to this flurry of presenters and presentations that are deeply committed to give you their best of their ability to share their knowledge on this. And so also almost say a renaissance of psychedelics. So much research is out there, so many innovative approaches, maybe disruptive or less disruptive, compound-wise and also psychotherapy-wise, that we can explore and we see how we can rejuvenate or incentivize ourselves in terms of the things that we can enable our caseload, our patients, to transform to. So with this, thank you for the organization to enable us all to connect together in this space and these days that are ahead of us to learn from each other, and hope you will be able to use your WUVA app and connect and ask questions and inform us and each other for the interest of our future topic of research, which is psychedelics and psychiatry. Thank you. I wish you a wonderful day and the future days in these events. Thank you.
So welcome back. For those of you wondering who in heaven's name this gentleman with his castle was, this is my co-presenter, one of the chairs of today's symposium, professor in psychotraumatology. I usually say in short because the actual professorship title is much longer. Eric Vermetten of the Leiden University Medical Center, who will be one of our chairs today. The other one is Robert Schroevers, professor of psychiatry at the UMCG in Groningen, who will join us later this afternoon. And Wim van den Brink, who unfortunately had another digital meeting. And just a quick word beforehand, we are doing this fully online, despite our utmost attempts to do this as a real live meeting, especially for this largely Dutch audience. This may, I don't know if you experienced the same as we did. There were some hiccups in the video. This may occur. This is the first time we're doing an event that is fully online. And I'd love to give the word to Eric to introduce us and introduce this day.
Yeah, thank you, Joost. It's a privilege for me to be here and to speak to you. So just a few minutes ago, we were in Leiden. A few days ago, beautiful weather. This morning here we're in Amsterdam. Actually, if I look outside of the window, it's a beautiful day here. It's going to get a little bit off the Indian summer type of so, but so I'm delighted to be able to address a few comments or so to set up the sort of warm us up for this day's event. And just, you may be aware, this, I was just asking Joost, this is not the first ICPR, it is the first ISPPP that we'll talk about in a minute, but this is the fourth ICPR. And the first one was in 2010, 2012, 2016. I was present at that one. So a lot of courage to do this in these difficult days, and to having had the difficult situation of recovering from a situation that the previous one that was supposed to happen in April was canceled, and we're doing this, and already the first comment is a compliment to you that you had the courage to beef us up and to inspire us and to organize this event.
Yeah, thank you. Just to riff off of you for a moment, because 2016 was a pivotal moment for us. I think you can share the story maybe a little bit better than I can, but indeed we met the night before the previous ICPR conference at a dinner hosted by Rick Doblin and Eric himself.
Correct.
And everything that happened since then, which Eric will tell you a little bit about, happened was actually kickstarted at that meeting, the dinner before ICPR.
It's true. I met Rick Doblin at the American Psychiatric Association meeting, and he was talking about psychedelic research. He was talking about Jan Bastiaans. It's like, Jan Bastiaans was a professor of psychiatry at Leiden University, which is my university. So I went up to Rick and I said, hey, we know a person that inspired us both. And he said, well, in 2 weeks I'll be in the Netherlands, so let's have dinner together. And that's how I met you. I invited you for that dinner, and then it's sort of all unfolded. It's only 4 years ago. It's been a roller coaster.
Very much, yes.
Now, I want to address a few points in these next couple of minutes or so. I'll talk briefly about research centers or so. We're in the midst of a turmoil of events, and I'm here in this space or so, space, quote unquote, space for the last, as Yo said, for the last 4 years or so. But I'll talk a little bit about research centers. I'll talk a little bit about clinical indications. I'll talk a little bit about clinical studies. I'll talk a little bit about the Dutch situation, challenges that may be ahead of us. And then we'll slide into where we are here together. And I just alluded to this little thing, WUVA. I hope that you will be able to use this WUVA account. This is a very elegant, simple device or so, or app or so, but maybe we'll.
Yeah, I'll spend a few minutes on it at the end.
Okay, so if you and I look at the web or so, like what the hell's going on in psychedelic research, and you look at, I'm a researcher, I'm a clinical researcher, and I see patients, but also conduct studies. And if we look at in psychiatry and psychotherapy and in other allied domains of neuroscience, and what we see is there's in the last couple of years an incentive of new research centers that may have already been lingering on, but for the last couple of years there have been private investors with fundraising opportunities that have had the potential to initiate a research center. The first one that came to my attention was the Imperial College in London, where through the years of work from Robert Carhart Harris and David Nutt, and with some funding from private investors, have launched a new research center at Imperial College. The same, a little half a year later, happened in Johns Hopkins, where already Ronald Griffiths was doing, with Matthew Johnson, was doing years of great research. And now they have a center for psychedelic and consciousness research. In Berkeley, there was just recently another research center for education, also psychedelic research in education. North Carolina, Michael Miethofer. So there are these sort of academic, well, some are really academic research centers that have profiled themselves. And I think for the future, we'll see an outpour of studies coming from that will help us better understand the field that we're doing. I think time is needed. And this is helped by donations like Tim Ferriss or the Cohen Foundation. And that's needed to be able to pay personal cost and infrastructure. What this research helps us, and I'm a clinical psychiatrist, and my incentive is coming from how can we help our caseload, or how can we help psychiatry and psychotherapy or so and what is puzzling also, but very interesting, is if we're talking about all these compounds, ketamine and psilocybin and MDMA, are they going to be tailored to one specific disease, or is this an opportunity for us to look from a sort of a transdiagnostic approach? It's something that puzzles me. Like, we have these boxes in DSM-5, and is MDMA just specific, let's say, for PTSD, or is it also for other disorders where we could see that it receives some attention or indication? So this transdiagnostic opportunity for psychiatry is a real challenge, to see where our disease model also fit in terms of these new compounds. We see phase 2, we see phase 3, and for the Dutch and for the international audience, we see phase 2 and phase 3 studies in MDMA, in psilocybin. We've seen the breakthrough therapy assignments by the FDA for psilocybin, for depression, for MDMA, for PTSD, and that's about to make headway. The phase 3 for MDMA is already pretty far advanced, and that's gonna allow us to look at what's gonna happen in the next ICPR conference in 4 years. Probably we have a registered drug that's a psychedelic drug. It might so be the case. We see microdosing. It's like just a couple of papers are coming out. What is that? Is it a hype? Is it serious research? And what is the biological drive of microdosing? Is it placebo? Or we're having a lot of research questions around trends or new ideas about the use of psychedelics. Consciousness research. There'll be a flurry of better understanding of things that happen in this mystical experience. A little bit zooming in for the Dutch attendees for this part is
Yes.
what's happening in the Netherlands. We or you organized this day specifically for a Dutch audience, and the IS, which is the International Symposium on Psychotherapy, Psychiatry, Psychedelics in Psychotherapy, and
Yes.
ISPPP.
It's not a perfect acronym.
Now, I would love, and you saw me there at that castle. It's been historic. It's been a psychiatric hospital for many years. How lovely would it be if that place could be the next psychedelic research center? Initially, we prompted it as just an idea, but we're making an effort to see if that is an opportunity for us to group together, to train people together, to educate people together, and maybe we have a potential to use that castle for a new purpose that has been dormant for years, for a new
Era.
Thank you for that word. I was going to say trend, but era. I think I like era. What is going on in the Netherlands? And it's not just a castle or so as a cherry, but in Groningen, with Robert Schroevers, who you're here today and see today, he's been using the opportunity to look at ketamine for indication of depression. He's been spearheading psilocybin for depression. Groningen is an academic center. We see research studies in Utrecht with Metten Sommers, who is also part of the trial that Compass is doing on psilocybin for depression. We see in Leiden by Nick van der Wey, a colleague of mine, who's doing the same part of the same study with Compass to look at psilocybin for depression. We see a flurry of research coming out from Maastricht, from the group of Jan Ramakers and Kim Kuipers, who are doing great research on the use in healthy, but also they're going to be part of clinical studies in a series of compounds. And of course, they have a legacy of doing that for years, and we'll hear much more about them in the years to come, I think. And with Amsterdam and Wim van der Brink, you'll hear also today. I think he's going to be part of that, or was he apologized?
No, he has a different meeting today. Yes.
From Nijmegen, ibogaine trials from the past. So you have several academic centers, and maybe I'm forgetting a few or so because there's so much going on. These are just the ones. Oh, the ones that I'm forgetting myself.
Yes, exactly.
Because I got stuck on the psilocybin and ketamine. Of course, MDMA is the one that I like so much because. The breakthrough therapy status for MDMA was given for PTSD, and PTSD is very much at my heart since I work with veterans and with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm quote unquote the ambassador for these studies in Europe. The phase 3 studies in the US are going very well. But in Europe, Europe is always second or so, right? It's,
not always.
Not always.
That's what the Americans want us to
That's what the Americans want us to believe. Is the studies are in the pipeline or so. We have 7 or 8 or 9 centers in Europe, and the trials for MDMA for the treatment of PTSD are well underway. So that's another with ARC National Center for PTSD, and with Leiden University. We're doing these trials, and we've been saying that for a long time. And actually, we screened the first couple of patients, and I think that we can start at our center. It's wonderful to see how that has come about. Very excited to see where that goes.
Yes. Also, just to say, if you compare the situation now, this ICPR to 4 years ago, all of this happened in the past 2, 3, 4 years. It's exploded in the Netherlands as well. And this is one of the reasons actually we wanted to have this meeting.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of interest across universities, across mental health professionals. And our aim really is to bring people together and to see if we can build this together.
True. I just met recently Albert de Haan, who spoke at the last ICPR.
Yes, good
and he
example.
said, actually, you know what? I gave a speech there and it was filmed, and actually people contacted me, and I'm now thrilled about looking at the use of ketamine beyond the way that I was looking at before. For him, it has also opened up, right? Open up his eyes and look. But not only Albert de Haan. A few minutes still?
Yes, a few minutes.
Some challenges are also ahead of us. So if we're all in this like wonderful mode, or like this is great and we're very happy, enthusiastic, and so there's some challenge ahead of us. If we wanted to bring this to clinical psychiatry and psychotherapy, and we see this registration of these drugs that catalyze the psychotherapeutic process or so, we need to scale up. Now, scaling up is easier said than done. How do we scale up? How do we educate? How do we train therapists? If MDMA is going to be registered as a drug for treatment of PTSD in 2 years or so, do we have enough therapists to make use of that application? Do we have enough infrastructure or so? Where are these centers going to be located? Is it going to be one research center that's certified for this treatment or so, 2 or 5? And who's coordinating that? So that's something we could think about and we could contemplate and where to drive that.
And that we should discuss actually today.
And that we should discuss. And I think that's sort of why we're here. And we see also, this is called ISPPP, psychiatry and psychotherapy, because these drugs, I feel strongly that they catalyze the psychotherapeutic process. Now, that's easier said than done too. What psychotherapy? Is it going to be non-directive? Is it going to be just sitting and waiting? Is it going to be Jungian? Is it going to be acceptance and commitment therapy? Is it going to be behavioral, or is it embedded into other ongoing psychotherapeutic approaches? I think we got to learn how to different look at the psychotherapeutic process with these compounds on board. So it not only stimulate looking at consciousness, but also look at ways to conduct psychotherapeutic processes. And what I find striking in that is these compounds are not compounds that you just give like an SSRI and the patient goes home. No, you sit here for hours with a patient, and some people do not like that. That's fine, and others do love it, to sit for 8 hours with a patient. It's opening up also new opportunities and challenges.
Okay.
2 more comments or so.
Yes.
Profit and not for profit. So I said something about research and who's paying for all this research. A lot of private investors and private fundraising opportunities emerge. Is the Dutch Scientific Research Organization participating in this? And where is the funding coming from? And are the healthcare companies going to be reimbursed these costs? It's something that we need to look at. Is it not for profit? Is it for profit? Psilocybin may be for profit and they may be not for profit. Like who's gonna make money out of it? Is it neat? Well, there's not big pharma, Janssen maybe with esketamine or so that's going to be launched. Funding. And maybe the last challenge or so that has nothing to do with psychedelics and psychotherapy and psychiatry is the use of WUVA.
Right? Very good. I think you're forgetting one thing,
which is
below your paper.
Oh, yes, thank you. I held it in my hand.
You had it in your hand.
Thank you so much. Otherwise, it would. No, this is something that we are, and not only we, but a flurry of authors can be proud of. After the last ICPR, we met with a couple of interesting people, and that led to the first, I'm looking at here, the first journal of the Tijdschrift voor Psychiatrie that's completely devoted to psychedelics.
The Dutch Journal of Psychiatry.
The Dutch Journal of Psychiatry is a unique event in history that has not seen a precedent. So it's not just 1 or 2 papers. The whole issue is about psychedelic research. So it calls for action also. It's beautiful. And you've done that with Wim van der Brink and Rien Van, who's the editor of this. Very courageous of him to give us that platform. We're very proud of that we have that. And that sort of should also incentivize us to look at, okay, what can I learn? And how can I better educate myself to understand the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us?
Exactly. And to wit, it's not just a journal on psychedelics and psychiatry, it's an interdisciplinary special issue. So, and that's what makes the study of psychedelics so interesting. It's not just the role of psychedelics in psychiatry, but there's epidemiology, historical context,
right,
psychological working mechanisms, anthropology. There's all these aspects to psychedelics, which will be discussed over the next 3 days. Today we'll focus primarily on psychedelics in psychiatry.
Just it might be trivial if I look at it, it's in Dutch. So the international audience, it is in Dutch.
Yes.
But for the Dutch people, they understand to be able to read it.
All right, thank you very much, Eric.
So
yes.
I want to close by wishing you a wonderful day. If you have the opportunity to stick around, to stay at your computer for a whole day, I think there's so much to learn. And if you need to drink a cup of coffee or so, it's going to be recorded and it'll be available or so for you to view later. Share with colleagues, talk about it. And I think that should inspire us all to make this an event that will be unforgettable.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. And I think that's a kind of courage in itself to be able to sit behind your computer for hours on end, watching lectures. There will be breaks. Please do use the breaks to get up, to get a drink, to walk around a little bit, because it is tiring sitting behind your computer. For those of you who have a Whova account, the Whova app is really useful to interact with your colleagues. It has a community button on the left. You can use it to create events, to start topics, to discuss with colleagues, There's already a meetup suggested for Amsterdam-based mental health professionals. So if you want, join Whova, I really recommend it. We'll also use Whova to direct questions to the speakers. So not all speakers will have a Q&A right after their lecture. Mendel, for example, our next speaker will come back at a larger panel later today. But after Mendel's presentation, we'll have an interview with Michelle Baker-Jones and Matt Jackson, done by Jan Mars, which will be followed by Q&A. And we recommend you to use the Whova app to ask questions. You can chat there. We'll have a bunch of people on our end responding to you, and we'll try to read those questions to the presenters. So that said, it is now my honor and privilege to introduce my good friend Mendel Kahlen, who was part of Open for a couple of years, then moved to Imperial College to do his PhD there, studying both of his passions, which I found wonderful, the interaction or the interface between music and psychedelics and how those interact in producing therapeutic outcomes. And he did a postdoc there, and then at some point left Imperial College to start his company, which is, I predict, will become very successful. It uses a combination of generative music and art to create an immersive musical experience, which Mendel will obviously tell you all about. So it is my honor to introduce to you our next speaker, Mendel Kahlen.
So the music that you just heard was by Mendel.
Yes, good point.
Music that you just heard, yeah, it's a song that is part of the first psychedelic therapy playlist I created for Imperial College London. Probably Michelle recognized the song as well. Is the sound and video okay? Just double checking. Yeah, great. Thank you, Eric and Joost, for that very nice and inspiring introduction. That worked way better to wake up with than my second cup of coffee. Really nice to be reminded of this thread that has been created for so many years. I first got interested in psychedelics in 2005. I met Joost in 2007, right before I came back from living in the Amazon jungle for quite a while, and made the commitment to finish my neuroscience education at the University of Groningen. So it's really nice to hear all those names coming back in that introduction. I was part of the first ICPR 2010 and all the others. Ended up living in London, worked with Imperial College London, David Nutt, Robin Carhart-Harris, Michelle, and many others. And in 2019, I started WavePaths, my own organization, really with the primary goal to focus on nothing less and more than understanding how we can harness the therapeutic potential of music in psychedelic therapy, but also outside of psychedelic therapy. And before I continue, I want to make sure I share my screen. It's also very nice to be surrounded by all these people that share a similar Dutch accent, speaking English. There we go. I'm trying to make it full screen. Great. Okay. Time myself because I don't see the timer. There we go. Yeah, so very nice to hear that introduction from you both, Eric and Joost, because rather than only focusing on music or only psychedelics, I wanted to take at least half of this presentation to focus on what I really came to see as what is both the strongest promise and the largest challenge in developing psychedelic therapy and making psychedelic therapy more accessible and available to more and more people around the world. Then I will link that up in the second half with research, both from myself and from others, on the role of music in psychedelic therapy. And really what the key messages are in this talk is that psychedelic therapy is not conventional psychiatry. It's not pharmacotherapy. it's also not psychotherapy as how we're used to. It represents a very interesting, unique paradigm of care. And that is one of the reasons why there are not only these opportunities, but there's all these important questions. How do we train therapists, like Eric pointed out? How do we create the right environments where these experiences take place, and so forth and so on? And many people know me from my research at Imperial College London, where I became known as, at least at psychedelic conferences, as the music guy, because in this modern era of research, I became the first that really published on and focused on understanding music and psychedelics better. Whenever I speak at music conferences, I got known as the drug guy, or that druggy guy. And the point here that I wanted to make, apart from the comical element here, is that I really have my feet in these both worlds. Psychedelics and music are both psychedelic, both have psychedelic properties in the real meaning of the word psychedelic. They're powerful tools to alter consciousness, and there is a real synergy going on in psychedelic therapy, which is very important to understand. So let's begin with the first part. This first slide needs very little time and introduction, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, lingering on this. But the bottom line is that we all come together here at a conference like this because we understand that mental health care as we know it needs desperate innovation, it needs change. Way too many people suffer from mental health problems, and even more importantly, way too many people don't receive therapies and treatments that really work for them. And there is great promise in psychedelic therapy, but it's important to understand that this is not the first wave of research that happened. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of important work happened, which crashed in the 70s, primarily for political reasons, I personally believe. And now we're in the middle of what we may call the second wave of psychedelic research, which is demonstrating that psychedelics can be safe and effective, and I emphasize can be safe and effective for a range of conditions. And what is very interesting when you look at all these different clinical trials and their results is not only are the therapeutic effects acute, they sustain for long periods of time, which make them very different from, again, pharmacotherapy, where it takes often weeks for effects to kick in and patients become dependent on taking these medications on a daily basis. And rightly so, there is more and more funding being poured into this community to understand better how we can develop psychedelic therapy and make it more available to all those care seekers around the world. Now, the more I looked into this, into this field as a researcher, there's one thing that really caught my attention, and that is not only do these effects sustain for long periods of time after just a few experiences with the drug, they seem to be mediated by certain qualities in the experience. So there's many studies by now that show the same phenomena. And some studies even report that up to 90% almost of the participants, of the patients, rate the experience that they had in psychedelic therapy amongst one of the most personally meaningful and spiritually significant experience of their entire lives. And that's quite something to take in and reflect on for a moment. And as many different studies have demonstrated, this is a summary graph. This is not real data. This is simply to illustrate a point, is that there's this phenomena going on where you may argue that the more personally meaningful the experience is, the stronger the symptom reduction is for the patient. The stronger the degree of peak experiences, for example, the stronger the symptom reduction is. And this is fascinating because it hints at a very different paradigm of care, a very different way of understanding how we actually should define mental health and how we should facilitate support for people who suffer and seek improvements in their mental health. And this idea that experiences are important for the psychedelic therapy outcomes. And just to take a step back, that there are certain qualities in the experience that relate with positive therapy outcomes. So if we simply look at, for example, the intensity of the drug effects or other parts of the experience, we don't see this relationship, but there's a specific correlation between qualities of experiences that have to do with personal meaning that relate to these positive therapy outcomes. This idea that experiences can be medicine actually has, I would argue, very solid foundations in neuroscience. And I'm going to give you a framework to start thinking about this in a new way. Very crudely speaking, the brain, the memory systems and the learning systems in the brain can be divided into two separate systems. One is an explicit learning system, which has to do with recalling and learning symbolic, semantic elements. And the other one has to do with recalling episodes and memories of episodes from the past, events from the past. The other learning system is called the implicit learning system, and it includes elements like procedural learning, conditioning, priming, learning how to ride a bicycle, for example. You can only learn how to ride a bicycle by riding a bicycle. Certain things you only learn and acquire the skills for by actively doing it or experiencing it. And the idea here is that the understanding, this is one of the most well-studied elements in neuroscience, I would argue. Eric Kendall is the Nobel Prize winner that first pioneered this idea, is that there are ways of learning that work fully subconscious, but that determine a lot of our perceptions and behavior. And the emotional system of the brain is the strongest learning system that we have, and it's fully implicit. And this is one reason why strong experiences lead to strong changes. Emotionally strong experiences lead to strong changes. So one framework to understand, one way to understand why we see these results in psychedelic therapy is by viewing psychedelic therapy as a way to provide implicit learning experiences for patients. And this is really one of the strongest promises, that psychedelic therapy seems to be working more at the core where change happens, rather than trying to change things at the molecular level only or at the behavioral level only. We really are tapping into a method that is able to modify all of these internal models that we are building up over time of how we relate to ourselves and others and the world around us. Now, this is one reason why it's such a different paradigm of care. And it begs a range of important questions. I just listed two here. If this is the case, how, as therapists, do we facilitate these implicit learning experiences? And another way to look at it is, how do we guide, how do we support these very, sometimes intense, altered states of consciousness? This is really one of the most important and most challenging things I came to believe that the future needs to address very well if psychedelic therapy needs to remain both safe and effective. And the more, and this is not just modern research, but even in the 50s and 60s, people emphasized this at some point very soon, is we cannot just provide the drug and expect patients to be better. It's not a magic pill. One other way, how I often like to phrase and conceptualize psychedelic therapy, is that psychedelic therapy aims to provide a favorable climate in which the client or patient can discover and experience new aspects of oneself. And I summarize this often as the synergistic core of psychedelic therapy, that the experience is important, but the experience is determined by a range of different variables. They include, needless to say, the drug itself, the mindset, the set, the physical environment, the setting, the music that is being played, and the interpersonal part of the therapy, the relationship between the patient and the therapists. And because, and this was for me a really pivotal moment, music plays such an important role. In fact, often it's the only stimulus the patients are exposed to, the only external stimulus. The typical model of how psychedelic therapy is currently developed and performed is by carefully preparing patients for this experience within this psychotherapeutic relationship, then providing the medicine in a carefully designed environment, and then encouraging the patient to wear an eye mask to direction the attention inwards and play music for many hours of the session. And this is where my research began. I argued that if if we do, if everyone is doing the therapy this way, we should not only look at the drug. We should look at how music and psychedelics interact with each other to better understand how this therapy works, what the mechanisms are, and how to understand how we can actually leverage and enhance therapy outcomes for patients and make the therapy more easy to perform as therapists. And I will unpack these statements for you in the coming slides. Very briefly, I'm going to go through this quickly for the sake of time, but one of the things that I always like to emphasize is that it's important to remember that these psychedelic plants, mushrooms, and cacti are incredibly ancient, and music as well. They are ancient and universal. Here's a few images of instruments, tens of thousands years old instruments. We were making music at the same time where we were sharing the lands with Neanderthalers. Musical instruments were one of the very first technologies that we invented as human beings. And not only are these musical instruments very old, they also, as you can see, very sophisticated. And this leads to the argument that we as a species have been making music for much longer than the years that you see here beneath these images, because we can make music without instruments. And this is a whole lecture in itself, but there are interesting arguments to make that music is actually a very intrinsic part of our humanity, of the way we structured our society, and the way language evolved as well. But I'm not going to go into this for the sake of time. The use of psychedelics are also very ancient. Less ancient, at least according to these artifacts, but they share an interesting old history as well. And importantly, when you look at traditional use of psychedelic medicines, you find that, to my knowledge, without exception, psychedelics and music are always used together, and they still are. This is a quote by a famous anthropologist who said, who studied ayahuasca shamanism: "We could only marvel at the pervasive presence of music in a variety of forms as an integral part of the psychedelic experience. Shamans state that the music they create provokes special types of visions." And this is not only the art that they associate with the ayahuasca, this is also a musical notation, believe it or not. Moving forward in time in the Western world, where we all started to get really confused and curious at the same time about this new class of compounds that entered our Western society, and psychiatrists started to look into these compounds very early on. Psychiatrists and psychotherapists realized that these compounds can facilitate a range of different experiences, and music was a really powerful way to influence the experience of the patient, and music became a central component. Really important work was done by Helen Bonney, who worked together with Stan Grof and Bill Richards and others. So let's get into this question. What is then the function of music in psychedelic therapy? What are ways that we can understand and talk about the role of music in psychedelic therapy? Really briefly, this is a summary overview of some of my research. The things we learned is that under the influence of psychedelic, people experience music-evoked emotion much more intensified. People experience meaning in music stronger compared to placebo. The brain is processing music in a very different way under the influence of psychedelic. There's a real synergy between psychedelics and music in enhancing the vividness of mental imagery, including personal memories. And we're starting to understand some of the predictors in the music experience that relate to these positive therapy outcomes. And this is also really the paper that led me to start WavePods, the hidden therapist. What we found here was that, and you can see this, I will guide you through the image on the right side, is on the y-axis you see elements related to the music experience and the drug intensity, and on the x-axis you see remission and depression and elements of the experience. And you see that these variables related to the musical experience correlate with remission and depression, whereas drug intensity does not. You also see that these variables in the musical experience selectively correlate with peak experiences and insightfulness, and not with the other elements of the experience. And this is one of the reasons, and one of the original reasons why music was introduced, to increase the likelihood of these experiences that we come to understand are related to positive therapy outcomes to happen, like peak experiences. This idea of liking, resonance, and openness, these variables actually correlate together as well. And we call this resonance. And with resonance, we mean personal resonance. The degree to which the music personally resonates with you predicts or relates to positive therapy outcomes, whereas the mere drug intensity does not. And I will speed up a little bit. I will want to make this a little bit more come to life. These are not just powerful experiences. These are very powerful experiences people can have. Some people say this is one of the most beautiful experiences of my entire life. People burst in tears, had these cathartic experiences, and have lots of memories. They often compare it as if they're watching a soundtrack of their own lives. And this was already well reported in the 50s as well. Main point I want to make here is that music can really make the experience, but it can also really break the experience. And you can get into much more detail into this in this paper, Data and Therapist. But what you will see and what you will find is that when the music doesn't personally resonate, there is a risk that patients will distance themselves from the experience, at least, and at worst, feel the foundation of trust and safety being completely abolished, leading to thought delusion, frightening experiences, and intense anxiety, and so forth and so on. So this led me to argue that the capacity to adapt music in psychedelic therapy is absolutely essential. And I compare this point often by using, or I explain this point often by using an analogy, the analogy of a hill covered in snow, and thinking of your mind as a hill covered in snow, and thinking of the information that you process in your mind as sledges going down from this hill. The more sledges go down, the more a central trail and a grid will appear in the snow, and the more new sledges will be attracted to these pre-existing trails. This is what our brains literally evolved to do through implicit learning experiences, is sampling information from the world and then processing that information more and more automatically. One way to understand psychedelics is that they temporarily flatten the snow of this hill. So these sledges can suddenly explore new landscapes or part of those landscapes more freely than in a usual sober condition. And this leads to an experience of enhanced mental flexibility. This is, I think, one of the most important things to emphasize: enhanced mental flexibility, enhanced emotionality. And within that, there's an opportunity for change. There's an opportunity to experience oneself and the world in a new way. And then when it comes to the question, what music to play for patients, the question is, well, what kind of experience does this patient need in this moment? Every song evokes a complete new experience. I often make this more poetic statement that rather than thinking about a song, I like to encourage therapists to think about worlds. What kind of world do we create for this patient in this moment? What kind of world does this patient journey through to discover or rediscover those important aspects of oneself? Whenever psychedelic therapists refer to psychedelic therapy as being non-directive, I strongly disagree. The very fact that we provide a medicine that enhances suggestibility, mental flexibility, and then on top of that play very emotionally evocative music makes it a very directive form of therapy. The question is, what type of direction do you provide for patients, and what is the degree of that direction? What is the forcefulness of that direction? And so there's a range of variables to think about when we select music for patients. We want to tailor the medicine to the music to the type of medicine, the dosage, and so forth and so on. We want to tailor the music to the individual. What's the musical language of this individual? What are the normal inclinations of this person to respond to certain genres and sounds, and how can we match that in our music selection? And what is the experience? What are the therapeutic needs right now? Just to make a link with my previous point, if the question is, what kind of climates should I provide for this patient? That is, of course, very much dependent on the experience of the patient, which changes from minute to minute, from hour to hour. So these therapeutic support conditions need to be tailored and adapted to the patient, to the unique patient needs. Okay, in summary, psychedelic therapy is new, it's complex. We're all learning more and more about this altogether. Music is very complex. People are very complex. And therefore, this is what we are currently working on. We are working with scientists, psychotherapists, technologists, artists, architects, designers, to bring all of that knowledge of how to facilitate experiences into one unified model and integrate that into a technology that makes person-centered use of music as intuitive, as simple, as accessible as the way a therapist may change the light in the room. And more about this, please visit our website, and I will share a bit more about this as well in another talk that I'll be giving tomorrow evening. In summary, psychedelic therapy is, again, very promising, but I believe that one of the largest challenges lay in the fact that we need to understand how to guide people through these very powerful altered states of consciousness and how to provide the ideal supportive therapeutic conditions for these patients. And music plays a very important role that can either make or break the experience of the patient. I think I'm in time. Thank you so much, everyone. I imagined an audience sitting and listening. Thankfully, I have a rich imagination. Thank you, Eric and Joost. If any one of you wants to have more information, again, we have a website. I'm also active on Twitter. We are also active on Twitter. And yeah, thank you.
All right, Joost, you're up.
Yes, hello, yes. Yeah, it's weird. You feel like clapping for such a beautiful presentation. I hope you also imagine the claps, Mendel. It is a little bit weird. We have to deal with the situation such as it is. Yeah, Mendel will be available for Q&A at the end of the next block. So I'm here to introduce our next guest, Jan Mars, psychologist based in Groningen, a fellow Amsterdammer, actually, who will take us through the next block. He's a psychologist working as a therapist in the psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression trial at the University Medical Center in Groningen. And he will interview Michelle Baker-Jones and Matt Jackson, who both participated in a trial for psilocybin in depression at Imperial College London. So the floor is yours, Jan. Have fun.
Thank you, Joost. Yes, today you will get the chance to gain an inside perspective on psychedelic therapy. So I think it's quite unique that we have the possibility to talk to a participant in a study and to the therapist, and to share their perspectives on psychedelic therapy. So I will be talking to Matt Jackson later on. He's been a participant in a trial at the Imperial College. And I will be talking to Michelle Baker-Jones. She's one of the lead therapists also involved in this trial, and I think maybe even more studies at the Imperial College. So first, Michelle Baker-Jones will tell a little bit about the study, how it is set up, how participants are being guided, and then we will dive into the interview, and we get a chance to get to know more about their thoughts about psychedelic therapy, and in the end, it's going to be open for questions for the audience as well. So, Michelle, I hand it over to you now for the presentation.
I've already sent the recorded presentation, so I don't know how that works.
All right, Michelle will be switching to the record in a few seconds.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to just introduce myself, or?
Yeah, that would be
Sure,
perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, my name is Michelle Baker-Jones. I've been working in private practice for 10 years. And then in 2015, I joined Imperial College's psychedelic research team. So I worked on Silodep 1, which was the pilot study to look at the efficacy of psilocybin to treat depression, which is where I became familiar with Mendel's playlist, actually. And recently I've been working on Silodep 2, which was a mechanism trial comparing psilocybin to a standard antidepressant, SRI, which is where I met Matt. So Matt is one of the participants on the trial. So there is a short presentation that we'll play where I basically just introduce a little bit more about the trial and the therapy model we use.
All right, then we'll be switching in a few seconds.
Mm-hmm. Hello, my name is Michelle Baker-Jones. I'm an integrative relational therapist. I've been working in private practice for 10 years. And in 2015, I joined Imperial College's psychedelic research team. So in this presentation, I will give a brief overview of the trial design of Silodep 2 and the ACE therapeutic model designed by Ros Watts, which was formulated really on the basis of the 6-month interview she carried out with the participants in Silodep 1, and her thematic analysis revealed that the mechanisms of acceptance and connection were key in shifting depression. So the therapeutic model is kind of organically emerged due to those results, as we will explore really a bit later. So as you can see, the trial is overseen by David Nutt, the principal investigator is Robin Carhart-Harris, and the clinical lead is Ros Watts. So it's a mechanism trial comparing psilocybin with a standard antidepressant as a treatment for depression. As you can see, we're a small core team. We have Roberta Murphy, Ashley Murphy-Biner, Johnny Martell, Rosalind Watts, Bruno Gabreldi, and myself. And we were also joined by co-guides that were incredibly valuable to us, Greg Donaldson, Benji Waterhouse, Rennie Harvey, and Graham Campbell. And each month we would have supervision with Tim Reed, who's a retired clinical psychologist and holotropic breathwork practitioner, whose support we found, again, invaluable. So the trial design, there were 2 arms to the trial. It was a randomized controlled trial, and both the guides and the participants were blinded. So one arm would receive two high doses of psilocybin 3 weeks apart, plus therapy and placebo tablets to take after the first high dose of psilocybin to the 6-point mark. And the other arm would be given 2 very low doses of psilocybin plus escitalopram to take up to the 6-point mark. And brain scans were taken before and after the trial to see what's happening in that area. So psychedelic guiding, as you can see, the room that we developed for psychedelic guiding looks lovely and homely and very comfortable. So the set and setting were perfect really for participants to go in and have that deep intrapsychic journey. And in order for them to do that, they needed to feel safe, not only with the space they were in, but with the guides. And obviously fostering safety was really key to the success of people's experiences. And in order to really help people be willing to go in and tackle their issues or go into the depths of their internal world, that we really needed to foster an attitude of bravery and curiosity towards that internal world. All of these qualities are needed for traditional talk therapy. And interestingly, in traditional talk therapy, it's often the experiential moments in which a client has any real shift or insight into their issues. And what psychedelics do is they reliably provide an experiential moment, deeply experiential moments. And I think what's really pertinent to depression is that the inability to feel keeps clients stuck in ruminative thinking. They're unable to think themselves out of depression. These moments of emotion and cognition and syncing together, along with feeling more embodied, can create emotional breakthroughs or transformative experiences. And as we know from the neuroscience, there is a marked decrease in the default mode network activity, which is highly active in ruminative thinking. It is felt this break creates some reprieve or disruption to normal depressive thoughts. So this here is the ACE integration diagram that often we would use with participants after their first experience to explain, I suppose, the principles of accept, connection, and body, and how they might use those principles to hold them until the next session. So Ros Watts developed PrEP and integration visualizations to help prepare the participants for the psychedelic experience, again, fostering an attitude of bravery and curiosity towards their own internal worlds, and acceptance of whatever emerges. So there's very much trying to counteract expectations of a magic cure, a magic bullet. It was just that whatever emerges is important, and working with whatever emerges is key to shifting your depression. In the PrEP visualization, the analogy of diving for spiky oysters is used to describe how it might be tricky to prise open and stay with one's pain, but there is the potential for the pearl of wisdom or insight if one can just stay with one's pain a little bit longer than usual. As we know, in traditional medicine, we go to great lengths to avoid pain, and in fact, often deal with the symptoms rather than do the work of looking at the root causes of the pain. And I suppose in this sense, the psychedelic assisted therapy model is about trying to get to the roots and the causes of our suffering, our depression. So the addition to the model is the process of embodiment, which we felt was an important aspect not only of the session, because often participants feel a lot more embodied in the psychedelic session, but also of integration and PrEP, like how do you embody these insights? How can you be more embodied? All these aspects are kind of key to being, I suppose, a more holistic and in touch individual. So yes, so for PrEP, it was encouraging participants to be aware of their bodies through the body scans and visualizations, which encourages them to locate their feelings or tensions within the body and to stay with them a while longer than normally feels comfortable. What's the message in their joy or pain? And this quote here from Ros Watts' paper on acceptance and connection, I think it's in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. If you want to read the full paper, it's a great paper. So yet, the reminder to focus on the ACE principles has been consistently valued by patients and therapists so far. It is our hope and experience that the ACE principles fit into each patient's therapeutic process so naturally that they are not experienced as directive, disruptive, or formulaic, but rather as reinforcing. This is crucial for the integrity of the treatment paradigm and also for the patient satisfaction. Patient reports from SILADEP-1 indicated that patients overwhelmingly preferred a client-centered and non-directive approach compared to more structured therapies that they had tried before. So in summary, psychedelics help to give you an education on how to look at yourself, teaching us how to self-reflect and be vulnerable with other people, which is good for the interpersonal realm and fostering a greater sense of relational embeddedness. So fostering deeper connection, which we know to some degree is often the antidote to depression. And it's important really as guides to unhook ourselves from the role of the expert, to deepen our humility, thus facilitating safety to allow the participant space to access their inner healer and finding a way forward that emerges organically through them. So very much creating and fostering the conditions for that internal process to happen, but not prescribing how the participant should move forward, trying to encourage them to find their own way forward, one that really comes from them, one that's felt viscerally from their experience. And what we know to some degree from SILADEP-1 and SILADEP-2, though the results have not been published as yet, is that the psychedelic assisted therapy can create some remission from depression and increase psychological flexibility, thus creating a different paradigm of mental health, where the action of the psychedelic and the therapeutic container encourage exploring the roots of our depression with a hope to slowly heal as opposed to dealing with symptoms. And we are aware that some people have incredibly transformative experiences and shift their depression for a considerable amount of time, but on the whole, it feels as though it's the beginning of a journey, it's the beginning of a process. And I think framing psychedelic assisted therapy as the beginning of a different process, a process of getting to the roots of one's depression, is key in moving forward. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I hope to hear some of your questions in the next session.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Yes, let's start with the interview with both of you. Can both
Hello.
of you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I did have a glitch then, but I think I'm back.
All right. Okay, good. Matt, I would like to hand it over to you first. You've had, if I'm not mistaken, 2 psychedelic sessions, high dose sessions, around May in 2019. So that's been 1.5 years ago. And you've had multiple talking therapies before, medication for your depression. And maybe briefly, could you say something about your situation, like how your situation was before going into the psychedelic therapy, and
Yes.
what kind of changes you've experienced afterwards?
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt, father of 3 boys. Between 2010 and 2018, I had 3 6-month sessions of psychotherapy. I'd been severely depressed as a result of several life-changing events, loss of 3 close friends within a very short period of time, loss of job, loss of relationship, and 20 years of marriage. Was really at the last chance saloon. As Michelle described, I was trying to think my way out of the depression. I was trying to behave my way out of the depression, but nothing would change that. I then took part in the Silodept 2 trial. And for me, that was it was hugely transformative. I've been very well since that trial. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh, yeah. So the background is I came across the work that Imperial was doing through a friend of mine who lived in the States, and he told me about some work that had been going on there and pointed me in the direction of the Michael Pollan book, which I read. I then wrote to Imperial in October, well, sort of August 2018, and then heard back from them saying, we'd like to talk some more. I then got in October 2018. And for me, I think the big differences were when I was in therapy, I felt there was an obligation to there was an obligation to spend my money wisely and talk to the therapist rather than actually listening to where my feelings were coming from. I think my depression was so deeply repressed that I couldn't access what was causing it because it was too painful to go there. With the Imperial trial, what I felt was that there was no pressure, there was no direction. With the trial, what I've hit to embrace the experience, which I grasped with both hands. And for me, it was the support that Imperial provided before I had my first experience that I think enabled me to get the most from it. I have to say the music was a very, very important part of the experience for me. And for me, the experience, certainly initially, I within the first 40 minutes, it was very physical for me. So I was physically trying to access where that pain was coming from. And yeah, I found it very cathartic. It was hugely transformational. And yes, there's not a day since that I haven't thought about that experience and the second experience that I've had. It has enabled me to be much kinder to myself and to understand and have greater insight into who I am and I think the key triggers for my depression.
Thank you, Matt. That's beautiful. And could you say something about, because it's been 1.5 years, could you say something about the changes that you can still feel in your personal life at this moment?
Okay. I think for me, I don't know whether other patients have experienced this, but the 2 to 3 week period after both of the doses were incredibly insightful for me. They were as profound and as important as the classic sort of psychedelic experience itself. The most obvious things became the things that were most obvious. I suddenly got recognition with. For example, there'd been some issues between particularly my mother and I. My mum was a ballerina, and of course, if you work in the world of ballet, you're highly controlled. You're controlled about weight, you're controlled about emotion, you're controlled about your physical fitness. And I was able to accept that that was the way that she was nurtured. And as a result, that was the kind of parenting style that she was going to perhaps use with her children. And that had created a great deal of tension. It was very obvious, but that became very clear. And I was able to accept that and to move on and to deal with a lot of the bad feelings that I had towards her in that respect. So that's a short-term insight within the sort of first 3 to 4 weeks after the first dose. Longer term, I have not had that overwhelming dark sensation or that ruminating thought of depression. I've had some challenging issues. Currently, my dad is dying from stage 4 bowel cancer, but I am managing that well. I am enjoying every moment that we have together. I have been sad. There have been issues, but they are not dragging me down. It's not like I've got a pair of concrete boots and I'm being dragged to the bottom of the swimming pool. I'm able to look at this with much better perspective. To be kinder to myself and to know that I am part of a bigger picture. And I suppose the element that I didn't focus on is that I do feel much more connected to people around me and our planet. And that really was one of the major, I think, insights of both experiences, that understanding of being connected. Because I went from being extremely isolated, where I couldn't talk about my feelings, even with those very close to me, to being able to really communicate those and accept them and to work with those feelings. So for me, it's been absolutely fantastic, and I've been very, very well.
Thank you, Matt. And thinking back of it, what do you think helped you to really benefit from this therapy, going into the therapy?
I suppose because, well, you don't go on a double-blind trial and tell psychologists and psychiatrists that you're about to step off the end of your chest and hang yourself because you know you're not going to get on the trial. But for me, what really did it was that I think I had a personal commitment. I had tried a lot of things to try and sort my depression out. Exercise, diet, lifestyle, friendships and relationships. I'd worked hard on all of those. So I was committed. And I think for me, it worked because I was prepared to accept. I trusted Michelle and Johnny and the team at Imperial. That trust was so important because I knew from reading, around the subject, this was going to be a significant emotional experience, and I was shit scared. But because I knew that they had my back and we were a team, and it was much more teamwork rather than me just being the patient, we were a team. That really, really helped me accept and really just accept that experience, because I can see how easily you could try to fight that, and that could be a very messy and perhaps a negative experience. So the Roz's model of accept and embody really helped me on my journey. So I think that's what did it for me. It was the teamwork and the model.
Okay, thanks. And I'd like to hand it over to Michelle as well, because obviously, Matt, you wanted to explore your inner depths. You were committed. You were courageous. So, Michelle, do you think this would also work for patients who are more withdrawn, more closed off?
Well, I think in terms of screening, developing a rapport or feeling that there's a basic rapport that you can build on is really key. And I think, even up to the point of the day where the participant can withdraw, if it feels the trust is not there and they're not ready, then even on the day, they don't have to, because it is, as Matt said, such a huge experience. You're so vulnerable, you're so open. So I think it's really important to keep checking along the way that trust is still, that working alliance is still robust enough for the experience. And, I don't think, we have people who've had challenging experiences, but most of the people appreciated them. But yeah, if someone is really not open to trust the team, and we recognize that, then I suppose that would be grounds to not proceed with the dosing.
And the commitment, the willingness to really dive in, is that a necessity? Do you think so?
Yes, for sure. And obviously it's on a scale. Matt was extremely committed, which I think, reflects how well he's doing. That he was very incredibly conscientious. Some people, there's a lot of poking and prodding and questionnaires. It's a huge, we demand a lot from the participants. So I think, and in the screening or the initial interviews, we're very much, because, some people are getting the low dose, we have to really check whether they're also willing to do this, for science to some degree. So they may not personally gain from the experience, though I think people often did, because it, even on a low dose, because it introduced a new paradigm of thinking about their mental health. But, some people obviously didn't benefit in the way that Matt did.
Right. And Matt, you've had talking therapies in the past. How was this therapy different for you compared to the talking therapies that you've had before?
I think because it was passive and I was the one doing the work or learning the skills on how I would do the work, that is the main difference. As I said initially, I think in talking therapies, you feel there's an obligation to talk. You don't sit there for your 50 minutes or 45 minutes and say nothing. Maybe some patients do, but I suppose because my nature is to please people, it was a very different type of therapy. I was the one doing the work. Michelle and the other guy, Dr. Martel, were very much there to help me along that journey. There was no direction whatsoever. It felt much more personalized and as if I was controlling the therapy, because there was that really good trust established in the first 3 days of being at the hospital. I was able to talk about some of the issues that I felt were creating a difficulty for me, but not in any great not in any great depth. So it was much more about me being in control and driving the process with the right kind of navigators sitting alongside.
Yeah, and do you also feel like that the connection with your therapist was different than in the talking therapies?
Yeah, completely. Completely. There was less focus on the individual and much more focus on the team. And from my personal perspective, that felt much more comfortable for me because I suppose it's a little bit indulgent, but there was a group of people, and yeah, it was less personality focused.
Okay, and Michelle, because you also give talking therapy. Do you feel that the connection that you're having with your patients in this psychedelic therapy is different than in talking therapies?
Yes, I think to a degree you are perhaps because you have to foster the trust very quickly. You maybe will maybe personally disclose, or you because I suppose talk therapy is very slow and it takes a long time. You have to foster this trust very quick, so you have to bring maybe more of your human self to the table, and because you're, you know, it's such an intense experience and you spend a lot of time together, so it's kind of an intense, quick connection, I suppose, that's kind of formed, whereas it's a slow, gradual one with talk therapy. So yes, it is. I would say it is quite different to some degree.
Right. And I think we talked a little bit before, and then and I like what you said about this kind of therapy and how it is for you as a therapist. You said it is more demanding, but it's also more rewarding.
That's right. Yeah.
And can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Because yeah, I suppose again, in traditional talk therapy, the transformations and the shifts are very slow and gradual. And I would say the thing, which is what kind of Mendel was saying, it's the experiential aspect that really facilitates the shift, and that's what the psychedelic reliably provides, is that experiential moment. Sorry, I've forgotten the question now.
It's more demanding for you as a therapist.
Oh yes.
More rewarding, yeah.
Because I suppose you get to see the transformation, you know, within 6 hours, and it, you know, from somebody who is tentative and afraid and disengaged with life to feel, you know, I mean, with Matt, it was remarkable. He himself said, I can't believe that after 6 hours, this is how I feel, that, you know, completely, I'm not the same person as I came in. And to watch that process happen is incredibly humbling, and to you know, just be alongside it. I don't think we make it happen, we just create the space for it to happen. Like Matt said, he's doing the work, you know, he's going in there and he's wrestling with his inner demons. We're just kind of creating, providing that support. But yeah, it is amazing to watch.
Yeah, and since you're saying it's more demanding, I could see that it might also affect your personal life a bit more. And I wonder, what do you think it kind of requires of a therapist to be able to do this kind of work?
So yes, just a lot of self-care. I suppose we have the team, so we would have group supervision, we would have the support of each other. Yeah, so I think you definitely need your practices, whether it's yoga or meditation or jogging or whatever, which is kind of what I do. And you need to ensure that, I suppose, and do your own inner work as well to some degree. So for instance, our supervisor was a holotropic breathwork supervisor. So being willing to go to that space, as you would with traditional talk therapy, to remember how frightening it can be and how, you know, how vulnerable you are. So again, reminding yourself of what it's like to be in that space. So yeah, all those.
And you think that's particularly important when you do this kind of psychedelic therapy?
I
go there
think,
yourself as well.
I do, yeah, in some capacity, I do think it's important to do that.
Okay. Matt, I got one last question, and then I'm going to check if there are some questions from the audience as well. Thinking back at the psychedelics experiences that you had and the setting in which they took place, what do you think would have been the ideal setting for you?
For me, I would love to have been in really close to nature, in a forest. For me, there was a very strong connection with nature. I brought some flowers from my garden into the second session. The first session, I brought some photos of those close friends that I spoke about who sadly died. But for me, it would be in a setting within a forest, within nature, away from cars and roads and other people, but with animals. That for me would be the ideal situation.
Thank you, Matt. I hope this will be possible somewhere in the future.
I hope so too.
Maybe near this beautiful castle in the Netherlands. I'm checking questions, but I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. And it surprises me because there must be a lot of questions. This is your chance to ask something directly to the participant or to the therapist. Yeah, so if I'm right, there are no questions.
I'm seeing some questions here.
All right. Okay. Maybe you can help me out.
Have you switched your phone on, Matt?
Yeah. Well, there's a question for Eric, which is, how far have you come in starting a possible centre at the castle? ? So that's one for Eric. Hang on.
I think that's related to the to the other other speaker. Yeah.
Okay. In the trial, did you screen for personality disorders? Were they included? If yes, what were the influences? I assume that is for Michelle.
Yes. So I didn't do the initial telephone screening, but anybody, so personality disorders would have been screened out for sure. Oh, Matt, I can't hear you now.
No, can you not hear me?
Oh yeah, you come back now.
Yeah. And then there's a question in Dutch. That was a reply. Okay.
Personality disorders gescreend worden?
Oh, maybe Michelle, can you say something about why there is a screening on personality disorders?
So I suppose I wouldn't. So it would be just because I suppose with personality disorders, whether it's bipolar or whether there was a relation. So if they had a first or second degree relation with schizophrenia, then it would just be a case of because the research is so new that that maybe we would have to adapt. It doesn't mean I think that bipolar people won't be able to have, or personality disorder people won't be able to have this treatment. It's just the safety really of the research right now, and that that those people would probably need more support was the thinking. So that's why they were screened out right now.
Okay, thank you. There's another question here from Thomas. Does prior experience with MDMA make people less susceptible to therapy?
Less susceptible?
Less susceptible.
That's not something I don't think it would. It's not something I've come across personally. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that would make a difference. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it probably increase the ability for you to have better therapy, which is what the MDMA PTSD therapy is all about, because you're more open and receptive. I mean, one thing I do have is the occasional person microdosing and having therapy with me, and what I've found is that they tend to be a bit more open and receptive to the therapy. I know that doesn't really answer the MDMA question, but I don't see why it would be an issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think if there's no questions left, we will leave it here. And I would like to thank you both for the interview. Matt, thanks a lot for being so open with us, with the audience.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure. If it helps the academic and the clinical team and practitioners, that's all that matters, really.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, we have one last question coming in. You already said something about the music. How did you experience the music during your sessions? How did it help you?
It was amazing. For me, it really helped. I'd never had any experiences like this before, so I didn't know what was going to happen. But for me, it was just amazing because it just took me into myself. So for me, it was like the roadmap. It was the roadmap that took me into my sort of subconscious. Yes, I had all those classic psychedelic images on the start of that journey, but it really helped take me to that place of total kindness and love. Because after about an hour, I went through this amazing change. I mean, I cannot describe how beautiful it was. And the music was very important.
Thanks, and I liked how you put that, like it opened up the roadmap.
Yeah.
Did you feel your relationship or your connection with music has changed after that experience?
Well, without a doubt. My tastes have become more eclectic, and there was one particular track that was playing very close, I think, to the peak of my experience. And if I listen to that, it really does resonate and mirror back some of the feelings that I had. You can feel those feelings within the subconscious coming through, and it's a great healer and warmer.
So you still listen back to the...
Yeah, very much so.
Great. Okay, thank you both. We're going to round it off.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, you both. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. And I'm really pleased that you will be back here tomorrow. So for everybody,
Saturday?
you may have...
Saturday.
Yes.
Sorry, you're absolutely right. Thank you.
Unless we don't know about it.
sometime in the future. Saturday, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much. For our audience, we'll take a short break until 11. So if you have any technical issues, we understand. Huva isn't perfect. The Q&A all of a sudden at the end when Jan was wrapping up started appearing. So questions started appearing and we couldn't tell if they'd been posted earlier or and were just invisible or people just had these questions at the end. But please let us know if you have any technical issues and we'll try to solve them during the break. And we'll be back at 11. And at 11, please go to the next block and then click the live stream in your Huva app. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in about 20-25 minutes. Yes.